What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, June 7th, 2017, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday. And boy, do we have lots of stuff to talk about today. A lot of things coming to a head. We've got the general election in Britain tomorrow. We've got Comey's getting ready to testify, and everybody's already second-guessing what he's going to say and spinning it before it even comes out of his mouth for their various political game. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A couple of quick program notes. Tomorrow in our third hour, we will have Phil Turney and Dave Gahary talking about Israel's attack on the USS Liberty. And following that, on the National Intel Report, Phil Turney will be continuing at the microphone as the guest host for that show. This is the 50th anniversary of Israel's attack on the USS Liberty. A lot of attention being paid to it everywhere except, of course, the Israeli government, the U.S. government, and the American corporate media who are out there still. Oh, it was an accident, really. It was a mistaken identity. Israel thought it was this Egyptian horse carrier because we all know Egyptian horse carriers have dish antennas all over them. More about that tomorrow here. Now, getting into the news here, James Clapper is already out there doing TV interviews saying that the Trump-Russia link is a bigger scandal than Watergate. Watergate just pales beside it, and he's out there just trying to sell this thing. And he did this interview before today's hearing before the Senate committee. And basically, I watched the Senate hearings, and all these people were out there saying, no, they never felt any pressure from Trump over the Russia probe. Now, when they were pressed for specific conversations, Rogers and Coates said, well, I'm not sure that I can go into that. And already the corporate media is trying to spin it that, oh, ho, they're covering up for the president. There's something evil going on there. And if the anti-Trumpers are hoping for a 1-2 knockout between today and Comey's hearing tomorrow, it doesn't look like it's really going to happen. They're not getting the smoking gun impeachable evidence. And the intelligence chiefs basically were out there saying, no, that they felt no pressure from Trump administration on the Russia probe. And the original headline at CNN was intelligence chiefs, no pressure from Trump administration on Russia probe. They now already changed that to say, oh, they won't talk about it. They're obviously hiding something here. Now, as far as Comey himself, apparently what he's going to say is already leaking on out. He's going to basically read this very long prepared statement. He is not going to claim that Donald Trump obstructed justice. He's not going to claim that Trump asked him to back off on any investigation. His one bone of contention is he's going to push back against Trump's assertion that Comey told Trump 3 times he isn't under investigation. There's nothing there. A verbal misunderstanding. That's it. They've tried to turn this into this big, huge stink, and it's falling apart on them. Meanwhile, things are heating up over there in the Middle East. It's clearly a chaotic situation. It could explode the whole region into war. It could fracture OPEC. It just seems to have come out of nowhere. Of course, we know that that never really happens. The Saudis are basically demanding total surrender. Qatar may not go along with that. I mean, the Qatar's rulers have to stay faced with their own people and their own political structure. And apparently there are 10 demands Saudi Arabia has made of Qatar. The blockade is already in effect. The blockade has started. And apparently they've given Qatar 24 hours to submit to these 10 demands. There's a rumor, this is not yet confirmed, one of the demands is the dismantling of Al Jazeera, breaking off of all relations with Iran, and of course ending support for the Muslim Brotherhood and especially Hamas. And the Saudis are threatening a military invasion. And Donald Trump is out there, or at least he was. He's backing off. He was trying to take credit for getting the Saudis to move against Qatar because of this comment that he made on the trip to the Middle East, where he seemed to imply that Qatar was funding these fundamental Islamist jihadis. And I guess Saudi Arabia is very, very upset that Qatar is funding the Islamists the same way Saudi Arabia's been doing it. I guess maybe Saudi Arabia feels Qatar's cutting in on their action. It's a little turf war. This is, that's our turf. We're doing this over here. We've got the license. This is our turf. Israel, to nobody's surprise, is backing Saudi's latest confrontation with Qatar and basically fanning it toward everybody's favorite enemy, Iran. Oh, this may be the opportunity to get the war against Iran that we have been wanting all along. So you've got Israel, Trump are saying this is a good thing, and they're all getting ready to see things happen in Qatar. There is one small consideration they ought to take into account, and that is Yemen, which is showing the world that for all their modern advanced weapons, the Saudis are not motivated fighters. They really are not strongly inclined to march into a neighboring Arab Muslim nation and kill people. And that may prove to be a problem. Qatar could actually turn into another quagmire. Now, because of the blockade, everybody in Qatar is panicking. They've emptied the supermarket stores. Their stock market is down. The value of their currency is down. And everybody's emptied out their bank accounts. Iran is already organizing a humanitarian supply mission to just fly from Iran to Qatar with plane loads of food, medicine, whatever else is needed. Now, this is going to be very, very tricky because it's one thing to have a naval blockade to prevent military weapons and other supplies coming on in. Shooting down a humanitarian aid flight, that's a very, very dicey thing to do diplomatically, although it's entirely possible Saudi Arabia might do it. Because, again, it's looking like this is an attempt to get into the war against Iran here. Now, meanwhile, there's been a lot of backlash because over on Qatar, there are these military bases that are being used by the United States. In particular, an air base and some 11,000 U.S. soldiers are inside Qatar right now. Now, what is Qatar going to do with them? Are they going to round them up? Are they going to put them in a cage? They can't just let them stand there. The U.S. could order them to march on the capital. But they're very, very concerned about Qatar saying, get your assets out of here at a time when they're still trying to project power across that Gulf here. And so diplomats are trying to back off from Donald Trump's diplomatic damage, and they're doing it by trying to blame Russia. That's it. That's the fall guy. No matter what goes wrong, it's all Russia's fault. And U.S. investigators are claiming that Russian hackers posted pro-Iran messages in the Qatar media, falsely attributed, and blah, blah, blah. So they're trying to say this is all a misunderstanding and it's all Russia's fault, and everybody ought to just calm on down. But it looks like it's gone a little too far for that. Turkey's already approved a bill. They're sending troops to Qatar. Assad's military alliance is basically threatening strikes against U.S. forces in Syria because Syria's been attacked because the U.S. has been attacking their forces over these so-called deconfliction zones, which aren't legitimate. The United Nations Security Council hasn't approved them. Damascus hasn't approved them. This is just the U.S. government arbitrarily going into another country, drawing some lines and saying, you stay out of here. It's now our toif. Now, Vladimir Zabarov, the first deputy chairman of the Russian Upper House International Affairs Committee, is saying that these reports that Russian hackers caused this ruckus in Qatar, it's an attempt to pit the U.S. and Russia against each other, to just keep up that enemy thing here. And before we get too much further on down there, we need to remember 3 times we were being told Russians were responsible for a hack, and it went nowhere. And before I give you the details on that, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And for those of you who were with us yesterday, the phones are working today, so feel free to call on in. Now, remember there was that French cyber security leader, no trace of Russian hacking in the Macron campaign, and they were claiming Russia had hacked that. Turned out that never happened. Remember the shadow brokers hack? That was blamed on Russia, and then they turned out it was a guy in Maryland who did it. And then there was that big story last year about how the Russians penetrated the U.S. electric grid, and they got into the grid up at a power station in Vermont, and it turned out there was some malware on a laptop completely unconnected to the grid, unconnected to the generating station, and they're not even sure it came from Russia. They're just pushing this idea, Russian hacker, Russian hacker, Russian hacker. So here we are with this possible war between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and so immediately the U.S. government leaps into action by voting to impose more sanctions on Russia and Iran. That'll teach Qatar. That'll teach those Qataris. We'll put more sanctions on Russia and Iran. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Jim in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, regarding Iran, what happened today, do you think someone did it so there can be more battles in the Middle East? And also, do you think maybe Israel, the United States, or Britain were the ones that were behind it, even though ISA is taking credit for it?
Well, again, ISIS appears to be a manufactured proxy group. We know the
Right.
U.S. has been supplying them and supporting them. We know that they've got a huge propaganda machine. So it's almost like it's all one big group. It's all
So
one.
who do you think is behind?
Well, I think ultimately it's the Western powers, mostly the United States. The Project for
Now,
the New American Century that's driving all of this stuff forward.
So do you think Iran is just going to sit there and take it, or do you think they're going to take some actions on their own?
Well, again, Iran is trying to play it cool. Iran, by their nature, is not a warmongering country. It's been over 200 years since Iran invaded another country in a war of conquest and aggression. So, like Putin, they're trying to play it cool. They know the Americans are coming for them. And right now, in the court of world opinion, it is very important that Iran not be goaded into an overt act that can be seized on as a justification for escalating the war. So I think basically they're going to sit on back and wait for the West to make an overt move. And yes, this attack on their parliament building, it's had an effect on their stock market. It's clearly a provocation. But again, the goal is to get Iran to do something where they're hitting American forces, where the U.S. can say, well, Iran has started the war. We must respond.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Michael.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, getting on to the domestic political scene, there are, again, more rumors and leaks coming out of the White House that Donald Trump is very unhappy with Attorney General Jeff Sessions for recusing himself from the Russian witch hunt, which resulted in the appointment of this special prosecutor, who so far is coming up empty. And again, based on the hearings this morning and what we're expecting to hear from Comey tomorrow, this whole Russia conspiracy is falling apart. It was a fairy tale, is what it was. And so I'm hoping that Trump and Sessions will kiss and make up. Meanwhile, there is a huge story that is coming on out, and it involves a lawsuit being brought forward by a former U.S. intelligence contractor, Dennis Montgomery. And he discovered evidence, vast amounts of evidence, that the NSA and the CIA have been illegally spying on over 20 million Americans. He's got the names. And he went through all the legal procedures to blow the whistle and try and resolve the matter to no avail. And now he's filing lawsuit against Comey for covering this all up. And apparently this guy is saying that he has copies of huge amounts of information, even more than Snowden, 600 million classified documents on hundreds of hard drives that he has very, very well hidden. And apparently one of the aspects of this is that the raw intelligence about these American citizens were shared by the FBI with unauthorized third parties, including foreign entities. Now, Donald Trump has announced that he is going to appoint a former Justice Department official, and somehow I forgot to get the I actually forgot to get the name in here. Trump has got nominating a Justice Department official and New Jersey Governor Chris Christie's personal lawyer during the George Washington Bridge lane closing investigation. And so Trump is nominating Christopher Wray, who has a very long track record. He's a white-collar defense lawyer, strong law enforcement background. He certainly knows more about law enforcement than Comey did. That's Trump's pick to head the FBI, and he looks like he's a serious guy. I mean, he's not going to put up with a lot of political guff here. A lot of people are still talking about the latest investigation and scandal to hit Teflon Hillary, or maybe Velcro Hillary this time. And it has to do with this corruption scandal out in Bangladesh and its involvement with the Clinton Foundation. And everybody's saying this one might actually stick. And it might, because as I mentioned, I think it was back on Monday, I think what's going on here, everybody's sick and tired of Hillary Clinton. They want her to just go away. She's out there on the speaking tour thing again. She's making ridiculous statements like we can end terrorism by understanding other cultures' food. And they want her to go away. She is an albatross around the neck of the Democratic Party going into next year's midterms and certainly going into 2020. They want her to go away. But they don't want to risk exposing the really bad scandals that could bring down the entire government. So they're picking this little fringe issue. And I think they're really going to go after her on this one. And they're just going to send a message. We're going to protect the big, deep, dark, ugly secret, and you are gracefully going to retire from public life over this one. I don't know. Given Hillary Clinton's displays of anger and rage, she might actually do something very, very reckless indeed. Because certainly the Hillary we saw after she lost the election did not present the image of Zen-like calm in the face of adversity here. But they're still looking at that one. We all want the Clintons to go away. They belong to a previous, darker age. And it is time for everybody to move on here. Now then, let's get on back to the terror attack at London Bridge. You saw the headlines immediately afterwards. Oh, we've arrested this person, we've arrested that person, we've arrested that person. Apparently, everybody who was arrested in connection with the London Bridge terror attack has now been released without any charges. This is according to TASS. And even more interesting, coming on out from Blacklisted News, the ISIS recruiter who radicalized the London Bridge attackers is now confirmed as having been protected by MI5. This was a false flag. They recruited these guys, they got them all worked up, and they sent them on out to be patsies. Because they needed a terror attack, probably to sway the election tomorrow. All right, I'm going to take a phone call. James in Tokyo. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mikael. How are you? Hope you're doing well, and Claire is doing well.
We're doing fine here.
That's great. You know, I've been to Qatar, and excuse my language, I think it's a real shithole.
I wish you would watch your language, because that's a problem for our on-air broadcasters, okay?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I was there like a little over a year ago from India. I got a good friend of mine living there, and it's kind of like a Wahhabi type of place, except they give women a little more rights, like they let them drive a car. That's about all they do, you know. But if you go to like a convenience store or anything, they're like separate registers for men and women, and it's really messed up place. And I felt really bad for my friend because she was there with her husband because he lost his job in London, and he had to work there, and she had to follow him, you know, to just survive.
We're almost to the commercial break. You need to wrap this up.
Anyway, Seth Rich, what do you think is going to go down with that? I think things are coming out, and everything is going to start happening from now on.
Well, we're literally seeing the truth activists getting the truth out there to the public, and the government and the corporate media just steadfast in trying to pretend that there's nothing there. It's degenerated down to personal insult and innuendo and calling us all conspiracy wackos, but they've worn that card out. So I'll have more about this when we come back from the commercial. Thank you for the phone call. We need to take a break for some words from our sponsor. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And in response to James' comment about what's going to be done about Seth Rich, officially, nothing. In the corporate media, nothing. The official story has been put on out, and they are all sticking to it. And you know something? all they're really doing is continuing to make themselves irrelevant to the American people. Because we have seen through the decades all of these assassinations and cover-ups and corruption, and we know what's really going on. And the U.S. government and the corporate media are looking more and more like a small child insisting they've done nothing wrong, while the remains of the broken vase are still on the floor around their feet. The government and the media have record low credibility scores in poll after poll after poll, and as they continue to lie and spin and stonewall, it's only going to get worse until we reach a point where the government simply cannot function any longer because nobody's going to listen to them. Why would we bother? Why take the risk of being made a total fool of again? After decades of being made total fools of in the eyes of the rest of the world. Now, getting on back to the London bombing, and Theresa May, her solution is, we're going to put censorship on the Internet because, by golly, we know the Internet is the source of all these jihadis and terrorists and everything. Actually, most of the jihadi material on the Internet is propaganda that's manufactured to ramp up the booga-booga, keep us all scared of the terrorists. And they're trying to use the terrorism to push the war agenda, to push the censorship agenda. At the same time, there's a pushback from the open borders agenda, saying, no, we can't do anything. So you can see where they're working at cross purposes here. Now, a story coming out of Investment Watch blog calls for internment of suspected terrorists are becoming more prevalent, not just in Great Britain, throughout Europe and America. They're saying, look, we shouldn't have changed the rules. It used to be if you wanted asylum in the United States of America, you would apply first, and then when it was granted, you would come on over. With the open borders people, it's just flood on in and fill out the paperwork somewhere down the road. And obviously that has caused problems for all these countries. We need to close those borders. Donald Trump is absolutely right. If you accept the official story of the Manchester bombing and the attack on London Bridge and the attack on the Iranian parliament and all the rest of it, then you have to agree that controlling who comes through our borders is a national priority right now. All right, we're going to take a really quick phone call. Mike in Alaska. What's on your mind today?
Mike, it used to be that you have to stay in the country when you were going to apply to become a refugee. You can't just walk on in and then do it later.
That's the way it used to be, yes.
And I'm wondering what changed, and I'm kind of thinking that Europe, a lot of these people, they've got a weird mentality that they can tell things are not right and they think, that these people have to go or have to stop coming in, first of all, but they kind of want to see everyone in the same boat as they are. They kind of want them to be in the U.S. as well, and it's kind of this weird perversion that the British Empire is over, and Europe is kind of stagnant as far as economic growth.
It is, and the American Empire is in decline as well.
Yeah, join us in our sorrow, kind of a thing.
I'm not sure that that's really that much of a factor, but again, in all these countries, the ordinary people are seeing the disconnect between what their corporate media is telling them, all the blessings of open borders, and what they're seeing with their own eyes is obviously the downside. And so it is not just the United States where the people have lost trust and confidence in their government and their corporate media. It's happening all over the globe right now. And that actually, in the long run, could be a very, very good thing. And we might actually have to develop new forms of governance that are forced to learn how to govern without lying to everybody. Because that obviously is a better way to go than constantly deceiving your own people. Because eventually that burden of accumulated lies builds to a point where it is going to bring the whole thing down. Anyway, Mike, we got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Thank you for the call. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Getting on back to Great Britain and the potential, in fact almost guaranteed impact of the Manchester bombing and the London Bridge attacks on tomorrow's election. There's a lot of turmoil going on within the British government. And apparently they're talking about changing the leadership vote rules in Parliament. And they're basically saying that Jeremy Corbyn, if he doesn't win the prime ministership, that he just needs to get out completely. They don't want him around anymore for some reason. Now let's get on to Syria, because things are getting really hot down there. Russia has now set up its own red lines inside Syria and is warning the U.S. not to cross them. Because apparently when the U.S. attacked pro-Syrian government forces, they also hit some Iranian militia and some other individuals who weren't really supposed to be targeted. And Russia is pointing out correctly that the self-proclaimed deconfliction zones are illegitimate. They are not recognized by Damascus or the United Nations Security Council. It's just the United States government arbitrarily drawing a border and say, you stay out of here. We're in charge now. This is our territory. We're in control of the gambling and prostitution and drugs here. Now, the Syrian army is going up against ISIS in Palmyra. There's some video that came out from that, very pitched battle. They're actually making a lot of progress in getting back these key areas of Syria back under the Syrian government control. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is acknowledging hundreds of U.S. troops are involved in the military campaign to recapture the city of Raqqa. And we've got boots on the ground. We're back to fighting in another Arab country's soil, uninvited as usual. And that is something that everybody needs to keep in mind. These countries don't want the United States there. The U.S. has been trying to get Assad out of power for 5 years. Assad does not want the United States in his country. He has not given the United States permission to be in his country. By any reasonable definition of an invasion, the United States has invaded Syria by planting military bases on the soil, sending in troops, sending in bombing missions. Now, because of this recent U.S. attack on pro-Syrian government forces, Russia is calling for an extraordinary Security Council meeting. They want to get together now and say, this has to be resolved. Now, of course, the U.S. has a right of veto over anything the Security Council may do, but Russia is playing the game by the rules. They're playing the game by international law. And international law is against the actions of the government of the United States of America. And we all need to keep that in mind. The rules exist for a reason. The rules are what hold together civilization. When you have a government that no longer plays by the rules, you are a civilization clearly in decline. That's one of the most telling indicators you have. When the government itself says, we're above the rules, we're above the law, we don't have to obey the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or international law, we're free to torture and spy and do whatever we feel is necessary, that is a civilization in decline. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call now. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Mike, so much is happening, my head's spinning around like Linda Blair from The Exorcist.
Oh, my goodness, that's terrible.
Well, this whole, look at the geopolitical shifting going on, like right before our eyes. Never seen anything before like this in our history, right?
No, we haven't. And again, if you look at the world before the official start of World War II, you'll see pretty much the same thing. There were all these regional conflicts. Japan had gone into Manchuria. Germany was going into Poland and everything. And it does feel very much like that. It does feel like, unfortunately, tragically, World War III is now unavoidable. And, of course, that's a personal failure for me, because that's been a big part of what we've been doing at WhatReallyHappened.com for the last 20 years, is trying to head off this insane rush to war.
Yeah, there's too many pieces moving around too quick, you know? There's just too much stuff happening, and somebody's going to make a fatal mistake. I mean, the Russians need to start doing some air cover for these convoys and putting like a Tor M2NA aircraft battery in with the column and stuff. Because
No. The last thing Putin wants to do, or let me rephrase that, the last thing that Putin should want to do is get into any kind of a situation where you're going to have American forces and Russian forces in direct conflict with each other. We've seen the U.S. trying to goad Russia into doing something with all these flights along the Russian border up in the Black Sea. They're trying to get Putin to do something where they can say, aha, we're now in a state of war.
But he cannot keep letting these convoys get hit, because then ISIS will just, it's just going to keep going on forever.
Well,
there's going to come a point when it's going to be enough's enough,
I'm afraid you're right, and unfortunately a lot of what we're seeing develop right now, like the situation in Qatar, it seems to be much less well thought out strategic policy and more of a shoot from the hip. Let's kick this over and see what happens kind of thinking, and that can be very dangerous. But you're right. The first hothead mistake, the first dumb, idiotic mistake, and the bullets are going to be flying in all directions, and eventually the nuclear weapons.
I have to give Erdogan credit, though. That was a great move by sending his troops to the base over there. Very smart move.
Well, he's getting kicked out. Germany is having to take their troops from the Incirlik air base. Jordan has already agreed they're going to take them in. So Germany will still be in the region, just slightly different.
Germany's the largest, that's pretty much the largest force in Incirlik, I think, right? Like the German force?
Yeah, it is. That's pretty much there. The U.S. is also using it, but I think the U.S. has already gotten out of there.
So we're out of Turkey, going to be out of Qatar soon. Definitely losing empire there, if anybody can tell.
Well, unfortunately, it looks like it almost feels like sooner or later, well, they're going to take Qatar. It almost feels like they're building up to try a direct takeover of Turkey. The coup d'etat failed, but they're not going to quit. They want Turkey brought back in to the empire.
All right, thanks a lot, Mike.
All right, thank you, Dustin. We're going to switch over to Sherry in Fredericksburg. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I just want to reiterate something. There was a time when Russia was in a position that we're in now, and Putin's country has suffered so much more than we've ever known here in America, and I don't know how bad it will get, but I hope Putin understands that we're just trying to be free. We're trying to be free, and
well, we lost that fight.
I hope our end result will be as successful as Russia's end result has been.
Mm-hmm.
But they've got their military preparedness going for them and everything, and I just want to say again that we need them. We need them. And I hope, I know there's a limit to what Russia can do, given that we're so aggressive, but we'll keep on keeping on, but we're in a bad position, and I hope we're successful, since Russia could tell us a few things,
Well, yeah.
We haven't known war here.
Well, not since the Civil War.
That's true.
Okay.
That's right. Yes. I just want to reiterate those things because they're just important to me.
Okay.
I mean, that's really all I wanted to say is they've been in our position, and I think they'd be there for us if we'd lay off. You know what I mean? If we would lay off, rather, harassing them.
I'm sure Putin would love to go back to being friends. I mean, after the fall of the Soviet Union and the new Russian republics came on up, everybody was buddy-buddy. And everything was fine. We were doing trade. We were doing deals. Everything was doing really great until Putin decided he was going to take direct government control of Russia's private central bank. Now, it's still privately owned, but it is now run by the government in order to manage Russia's public currency as a public utility. And that was the day that all of a sudden Russia went back to being the bad, evil people, and it was a threat to private central banks everywhere, a threat to dollar hegemony, along with China's yuan. And that's really what it's all about. If you look at it from a purely economic situation, the United States has allowed its manufacturing to decline in quantity and quality over the last 30 years. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. And right now, forcing the world to use the U.S. dollar for global trade and banking and charging them interest or asking them to send us manufactured goods and agricultural produce for boxes of ink and paper, that's the only thing holding the economy up. And if Russia and China and the rest of the world stop using the dollar internationally, that's it. There's nothing left to hold up the U.S. economy. And maybe Putin is thinking that he just has to wait it out, that an economic crash is inevitable, and that the U.S. government will be brought down by it, just the way the Soviet Union was brought down by their unpayable debt. And we'll hit the reset button, and we'll have a new American republic.
Well, that's what I'm hoping, that he'll wait it out and know how much we're trying to get our act together in the face of all this corruption. And I just wanted to say that, so in case he's listening. Okay?
Well, I expect that probably somebody on behalf of the Russian government is listening to this
yes,
show.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm sure representatives of a lot of governments are listening to this show, taking little furtive notes about, he said bad things about it. All right, well, listen, Sherry, we're going to let you go.
Thank you, Mike.
And again, revealing that there is a lot of Great War thinking going on in the bowels of power. Apparently, a former CIA Deputy Chief of the Balkan Task Force, Stephen Mayer, is out there saying it's time to redraw the Balkan borders again. In other words, go on into these other nations and redraw the borders of the former Yugoslavia in response to the emergence of the so-called Greater Albania. Albania is now a problem. We've got to deal with it. And again, it's this arrogance of we have a right to go on in and muck about with other people's countries. And I'll tell you very, very simply, people don't like to have their countries mucked about with. It's that simple. They're trying to do the best that they can in their own country. They don't need outsiders coming on in and trying to carve it on up and loot the natural resources and try and bring the American system of privatized everything to plunder the people. Now, there's a story over in Sputnik News where Israel is gearing up for an attack from Hezbollah, which means Israel is gearing up to fake an attack from Hezbollah so they can go back into Lebanon while the world is watching what's going on over in Qatar. Because Israel likes to do that. When the world is distracted somewhere else, they make a move and they still want that Litani River. Absolutely want that Litani River. Meanwhile, Nikki Haley is running around the United Nations and saying that we're not going to allow the United Nations to bully Israel anymore. Clearly, the United Nations are anti-Semitic. If it was any other country that was committing genocide and ethnic cleansing, they wouldn't pay attention. They're only paying attention to Palestine because they hate the Israelis. It is rather embarrassing and humiliating to me as an American citizen to see our ambassador to the United Nations groveling to a foreign government. Now, the Pentagon is waving around the flags and up in arms over the fact that Beijing is now arming its man-made islands in the South China Sea. And apparently they're putting in runways, airplane hangars. They don't know exactly what's going on in there, but the attitude is, obviously they're fortifying and arming these man-made islands. Well, with the U.S. invading everything in sight, and leading the harangue that China no longer owns that part of the ocean, even though it was set forth in treaties at the end of World War II that was all their territory. Wouldn't you be arming up? Wouldn't you be buying guns? There's this very bizarre attitude we see from the Pentagon and indeed much of the entire administration that other countries shouldn't have a right to defend themselves from U.S. invasion. And that is ludicrous. It is absolutely ludicrous. Now, meanwhile, it is beginning to look like that tensions over North Korea may be backing off. First of all, the president of South Korea has now halted the deployments of the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Missile Systems. They're all being put back on their trailers, put back in their trucks. He said, shut them down. Absolutely shut them down. And it's good that he's showing a firm hand when it turns out much of his military high command is more sympathetic to the U.S. than to their own government. But they are being shut on down, and President Moon Jae-in is, again, seems to be moving forward. He wants to reach his hand across that DMZ to Kim Jong-un and say, let's calm this down. Neither one of us needs the U.S. coming on in and messing this place up again like they did all those years ago. So as a result, the U.S. aircraft carriers Ronald Reagan and the Carl Vinson have moved away from the Korean Peninsula. Now, they're still, according to the Navy's website, they're still in the area of the Sea of Japan, but they're on their way back. Now, the Carl Vinson is eventually going to return to the home port in the U.S. city of San Diego, and the Reagan is their area of operation is over in the Western Pacific, so they're going to continue there. But it looks like they're kind of pulling back a little bit. They didn't get their little war in North Korea. They didn't get their backdoor to war with China, which is, I guess, why they're ramping up on Qatar. We couldn't get North Korea. It was going to be too much of a problem. We can whip Qatar. Anybody can whip Qatar. My grandmother could whip Qatar with her hand tied behind her back. My grandfather could whip Qatar with his breath. Now, as you know, Vladimir Putin is giving a series of interviews to Megyn Kelly, which didn't work out too well. And he's giving a lot of interviews to film director Oliver Stone. And one of the interesting things that Putin came on out and said, and I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with him, we do not want war with the U.S. because nobody on earth would survive it. And he is absolutely correct. When you look at the total nuclear and biological and chemical arsenals of the United States of America and Russia, we're talking extinction-level event. The problem we have here in the United States of America is the U.S. government has spent a huge amount of money over the last 2 decades building all these underground bunkers. They actually think they're going to nuke the surface of planet Earth in this argument over whose brand of ink and paper we're all going to use. Then they're going to go on down to their bunkers, and they're just going to live down there for a year or two, and then they come on up, and it's going to be beautiful and natural world, and it's all going to be wonderful, and no, it isn't. I think the movie and book On the Beach is a more accurate prediction of what will happen. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, as you know, every once in a while we start hearing all this talk over in Brussels about a grand army of the European Union. And, of course, the member states of the European Union are very nervous about that because Brussels continues to mutate into this tyrannical structure. Remember, the European Union was originally all about a free travel, free trade zone. No internal borders. That was it. It was all about trade. That was it. And over time, Brussels has basically enshrined itself as this all-powerful centralized government, which was never intended at the beginning, a lot like the United States itself. When the Founding Fathers set up the United States of America, it was a confederation of independent states, and the central government was basically an arbiter between the states, and that was it. And over time, the central government has acquired more power and taken more authority away from the states, especially after the Civil War. You should go back and read all the amendments to the Constitution that were passed right after the Civil War. It is an eye-opener. And the same thing happened in the European Union. Now, over in the European Union, they're talking about having a single European Union army to become a second NATO. They want to be a second NATO, a force to be reckoned with. Well, there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, most of the European Union member states are already part of NATO. If they are required to support a second NATO, it means dividing the available resources. They're not just going to come up with more money to fund a second copy of NATO. And a lot of the EU member states are really not all that happy with NATO anywhere. So, again, this is just another power grab by the Eurocrats to try and build a single united Europe with a single European army with which to go on out and muck about with other people's countries. All right, we're going to take a phone call from Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing all right.
Mike, said you were talking about the. You can say that to Megyn Kelly.
No, he said it to Oliver Stone. He said it to Oliver Stone.
To Oliver Stone?
Yeah.
When was that interview?
Well, apparently Putin has been giving Oliver Stone a whole series of interviews. I guess maybe Oliver Stone is looking at doing a film about him now that he's got this one about Barry Seal is about to come on out. And by the way, I looked at the blurb for the Barry Seal movie, and it talks about his drug smuggling and all the rest of it. Not a mention of Iran, Contra, not a mention of Arkansas or MENA. We'll see what's in the actual movie, whether it's as revealing and accurate as JFK was. But I have a feeling
it's going to be it's going to be a movie with actors, or is it going to be like a documentary?
No, it's a movie with actors. In fact, I think Tom Cruise is going to play Barry Seal. I'm not sure about that, but I think that's what I heard.
Oh, wow. When is it coming out? I hope soon.
Yeah, it's coming out this summer. Okay, listen,
wow.
We got to let you go. Got to take a break for station identification, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And I went on out and I double-checked. And, yes, Tom Cruise is playing Barry Seal. And here's what's interesting. The earlier blurb I had read about this was in the American media, and no mention of Iran-Contra. In the foreign press, it's mentioned. I'm looking at this over in the Express. And it says this is about the CIA's plot to fly arms to Central America and bring cocaine back to the U.S., which exploded into the infamous Iran-Contra scandal. Now, earlier in the show, I said that there were leaks coming on out that Comey was going to stop short of saying that Donald Trump obstructed justice, and he was going to make a big deal over Trump's claim that Comey said that he was not under investigation. Now, all of a sudden, over at Reason.com, they're running the exact opposite story, saying that Comey will testify that Trump tried to shut down the Flynn investigation. So I don't know what's going on in the back channel, or if everybody's just so caught up in the spin cycle that they've lost all touch with reality. Time will tell for tomorrow. But again, look at Comey's history. Director at HSBC when it was laundering drug money, cover-up for Hillary Clinton's crimes. He's been caught lying under oath before Congress. I don't care what he says tomorrow. It's not worth listening to, really. All righty, we're going to take, let's see. No, we already took that phone call. No, Brendan in San Francisco. Brendan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, you missed it. The EU already has an army. In fact, they're still shipping them in every day on those boats in Africa and Libya.
I don't think they're going to be very effective fighting.
Yeah, they haven't got the uniforms. The order for the uniforms is still out. The contract's still out for bid. But, yeah, they've got their army sitting there waiting for us. And I'm using a euphemism of tar and feather, but I think decapitation strikes are in order for a lot of these Nazis like Juncker. Who is this guy? The Nazi descendant from some war profiteering aviation company?
I'm not familiar with his background on that one, but yeah, the name Juncker, we certainly recall that from World War II aviation as well. But I mean, a lot of these people in Europe, they do go back to World War II. Look at George Soros, and it's just, you know, it's almost like we're replaying that history all over again.
The fact that that guy Soros is still breathing, and these Nazi hunters, these Zionist Nazi hunters, why is this guy getting a pass?
He wasn't a Nazi. He just helped them.
Yeah, right. Well, there you go. I mean, the shoe polisher at Auschwitz probably got hanged. But to all our brothers and sisters from India and China, we need you guys, man. This whole divide and conquer thing, we can't let it work. We have to get it together, people, and just freaking focus on the true enemy of the states and call these fools out. Where's our Navy SEAL guys, our buddies that we need? We got to get it together, people. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now then, interesting little development here. Story that came out of Russia today. Now, again, going back to when Russia took control of their central bank and sort of changed the rest of the world's attitude about them, we have been seeing the U.S. trying to drive a wedge between Russia and the European Union. And that was certainly very obvious and visible under Barack Obama. But so far, and Trump's only been in office a little while now. It appears Russia is now renewing close relations, at least with the French and the Germans. And so, again, we're seeing this this pull where the U.S. government imagined a unipolar world centered on them, and now all of a sudden it's becoming a multipolar world again. And we're seeing more and more countries, including longtime traditional friends, start to edge away from the U.S. and more over toward the Russian and Chinese spheres of influence. And I don't think it's really an issue of whether they like us or not. It's an issue of practicality. I think most of them realize that the United States is a failing empire, that we're looking at a horrendous economic crash coming, possibly the collapse of the central federal government, like the former Soviet Union. And they're also looking at this obvious push toward a new world war, and they want to delink from that, especially in Europe, where the scars of the first two world wars are still visible. So, anyway. Apparently, Kathy Griffin is continuing to lose. Sponsors, shows, opportunities. That was a very bad move on her part. She's still playing the victim card. Oh, it's all the fault of Trump. He hates women. He hates entertainers. He's shut the heck up. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, as you know, Megyn Kelly has had a relaunch over at NBC, and it was a huge build-up. She got the interview with Vladimir Putin, and we're looking at $20 million. And critics were not impressed. They weren't impressed at all. In fact, the consensus of opinion for people who saw the complete unedited interview, because NBC edited it to try and make Putin look bad and Megyn Kelly look good. But basically it was a rough launch for Megyn Kelly. She wasn't able to take control of the interview. Vladimir Putin just rolled right over her. Let's see. We already talked about Dennis Montgomery and his monster lawsuit against the FBI. Let's talk about the economic news for a little bit. Story coming on out from goldcore.com. Gold breaks the 6-year downtrend on safe haven and a 50% surge in Chinese demand. Now, we have been hearing over the last several months how it is constantly being confirmed and reconfirmed and reaffirmed that the major banks have been conspiring to suppress the price of physical metals, gold and silver, in order to keep people from selling their stock portfolio, getting into metals, or emptying their bank accounts. They're trying to keep stocks looking very attractive relative to gold, even though in both cases there's a lot of rigging going on. But at some point the rigging has to break down, because right now everyone's talking safe haven. With all the turmoil going on in the world right now, a lot of people all over the world are deciding it's time to get out of the investment markets, because anything could send them into turmoil. Look at what happened to the Iranian stock market after the attack on their parliament building. Look what happened in Qatar to their stock market. Just from Donald Trump's tweet. Our economic system is so fragile, the least little incident or misstatement could send it into turmoil. And people are looking for that safe haven. And safe haven is to be found in gold and silver and other precious commodity materials. Platinum, tantalum, all kinds of things out there that will hold value. I find it amazing that there are actually investment rounds and bars in copper. And that's bizarre for me, because when I was a kid, copper is what you made the plumbing out of. You go into a hardware store and there's racks and racks of copper pipes and faucets and everything. It was all very, very pretty. And apparently the Chinese, because of their economic turmoil, they're trying to buy gold. And their government's encouraging them to do it. Now, over in Spain, it looks like they may avoid, at least temporarily, the European Union bail-in law, because Banco Popular has been bought by one of their largest banks, Santander, and they bought it for the price of just €1. And apparently Santander is thinking that they have enough cash reserves to get Banco Popular back on track, back into the black. We will see. It all depends on how honest the bookkeeping has been over at Banco Popular. Because books get cooked, debt gets hidden. That's what Papandreou and Goldman Sachs did to the people of Greece. And I'll share a little story from my years in Hollywood. I was working for a company. I'm not going to name the companies or the players because some of them are still around. But there was this one company that decided they wanted to try and establish a monopoly in the field of computer animation. And so they started buying up some smaller companies, and they bought up the company I was working for at the time. And the problem was that the books shown to the prospective buyer weren't accurate. They concealed a huge amount of debt that the company I was working for was carrying. And when the merger was done and the real books were revealed, the whole thing collapsed. It does go on. It happens all the time with businesses, with governments, with banks. So if Banco Popular's bookkeeping was not accurate, it could drag Santander down with it. Good news if you're over there in Colorado. Apparently Colorado has the lowest unemployment rate in the United States. Apparently their economy is booming due to the pot sales. Everybody's out there buying and selling pot and the pipes and the things and the grinders and whatever all else it is that you use with that stuff. So there's a little good sign there. Of course, the alcohol and tobacco people aren't too happy about it, but that's competition and evolution. Two things that are absolutely hated by the fascist economic dictatorship. Sears is still in trouble. Apparently, they're now saying that this year they're going to be closing a total of 250 stores. We don't have that complete list. There was a partial list that came out the other day. I still think they're probably going to close the one that's down here at the bottom of the hill. It is clearly not performing. And it doesn't really help that Sears bowed to pressure from Israel supporters, and they pulled a line of T-shirts, actually an entire clothing line from their store, which was based on Free Palestine or I Love Palestine. And it was on their website, and they got the usual complaints, and they yanked it, showing that they have no spine. Now, let me share something with you all about what the retail experience is supposed to be. A retail store, in order to maximize the potential for sales, will have a lot of different products that cater to different people's interests. When you go into the store, if you see something that you don't like, you don't buy it. You turn around, you find something you do like, and you do buy it. So for all those who were objecting to the Free Palestine clothing line at Sears, the proper adult rational response is to simply walk to some other part of the clothing department and find something that you do like. Not get out there and scream and cry so that the people who might want to wear a Free Palestine shirt are denied the freedom to do so. That's how adults would do. We live in an age right now where anybody feels if they whine and cry and scream and kick enough, that they can decide what everybody else is going to see or read or hear. Seeing all these protests on college campuses. No, you can't have this speaker or that speaker. We have to have a safe zone. We need a day where whites are not allowed on the campus. We're descending into a mobocracy. And again, that's another parallel with what was happening to ancient Rome just before it fell apart, where the mob just demanded whatever they wanted, bread and circuses. And the government capitulated until finally the government collapsed. Now, apparently, bankruptcies by consumers and businesses are on the increase again. Everybody is starting to buckle under the debt load. And there have been a slight decline in bankruptcies as we got out of the 2008 collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud, but they're heading back up again. Part of the problem is that a lot of people are trying to make economic forecasts and business forecasts on the basis of the official U.S. government claims. And they're not accurate. So, of course, they come up short in their business models. Now, as you know, the debate is still raging over the potential repeal and replacement of Obamacare. And Trump is trying to get back to that in the midst of all this other nonsense about Comey this and Russia that. And, of course, the health insurance industries, which expected to make huge amounts of money from Obamacare and didn't, they're dropping out of the program and clamoring for their promised taxpayer bailouts. They're hoping that the replacement for Obamacare will, in fact, work the way they wanted Obamacare to work. High insurance rates for everybody, high deductibles, health insurance companies making tons and tons of money. Because that's the new way commerce works in the United States of America. Now, when I was a kid, the way it worked is you would build a good product people wanted to buy, or you'd grow some healthy food people wanted to eat. And they would give you their money, and you would give them the product or the food, and everybody went away happy. Today, corporations will make things that are useless, even dangerous, and then scream for the government to force us all to buy the stuff. And that really doesn't work. Meanwhile, we are hearing, in the wake of that study that was done out in California, which said a single-payer system would result in everybody being covered and save billions of dollars every single year. More and more voters are now out there saying, yeah, we want a single-payer system. And, of course, the Democrats are out there. They want to preserve Obamacare. It's got his name on it. It was his signature accomplishment. But the voters are starting to say they want a single-payer system because it works in so many other countries. They want a health system that is really concerned about health and is not just another for-profit scam. Because this nation can't survive scammers any longer. We've run out of money. We've run out of resources. Scams are so prevalent, it's starting to shut the entire society down, especially in the area of computers. Okay, let's talk about Europe and immigration. There's a lot of stuff going on over there. And apparently the latest wrinkle is that refugees that are coming on into Germany, female refugees with children, are literally paying German men 5,000 euros to say they are the father of the children, which under German law means that the mother and the child cannot be deported. And apparently German broadcaster RBB did an investigation into this. And apparently German prosecutors have already found 700 men who went for this deal, and they are in a serious amount of trouble. Now, my question is, if these people are poor, struggling refugees fleeing a combat zone, how is it they happen to have 5,000 euros that they can bribe a German guy with? There is something that doesn't really make sense about. Now, up in Sweden, and we've been poking fun at their liberal government, their feminist government, and I'm hardly alone in doing that. Jeremy Clarkson, when Grand Tour was in Sweden, was making fun of the car-free zones and the bicycle paths. And we know that Sweden has just gone totally over the end on this open border situation, and we're not going to talk about all the problems refugees are causing. But apparently there is a surge of Euroscepticism taking place in Sweden that is basically becoming a major problem for Sweden's current government. And they're looking at possible major changes in their next election. In fact, the opposition is already saying this feminist, liberal Swedish government is already obsolete. It's out of touch with what's going on in Sweden today. And we're seeing that more and more across the European Union. And as I was mentioning earlier in the show, all over Europe, all over the United States of America, people are seeing this growing disconnect between what the TV tells them is reality and what they can see around them with their own eyes. Oh, unemployment's only 4%. We look out our windows, we see cracked pavement, we see retail vacancies, we see massive homelessness and hunger. We know what the real world is, and it is not being presented to us through those corporate media outlets. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And still talking about Sweden, one of our members just posted this story to whatreallyhappened.com. And apparently there is a fad or a fashion, a trend going on in Sweden where women are proving their tolerance and understanding for the refugees by having sex with them voluntarily. We're not talking about the rape issue where the women are literally going on out, finding a refugee, taking them home, and having sex with them. And those Swedish women, I remember meeting a few when I was working in Europe, but they're a lot more free about such things than the uptight Americans. But still in all, it does seem to be kind of going overboard on this political correctness issue here. And, of course, the danger here is that the refugees that are flowing into Europe and to the United States are carrying diseases, some of them sexually transmissible, some of them untreatable. And so I'm hoping that they're engaging in safe sex, but it's a risk to be doing that. Now, getting on back to what's going on here locally, over at Fox News, Greg Jarrett is calling on Ruth Bader Ginsburg to recuse herself from the upcoming hearing on the travel ban over the fact that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been very public with her comments opposing Donald Trump, which, by the way, is a violation of the rules of the Supreme Court. It is expressly forbidden for any justice on the Supreme Court to speak out either for or against a candidate or a politician. It's an absolute violation. So Greg Jarrett is saying she should step down. The problem with that is, of course, it creates a potential for a tie vote. Now, as you know, some of the European Union member states are starting to say, we're closing the borders, we don't care what Brussels says about it. Latest poll from Poland, 71% of the people there want to ban Muslim immigration. They've just had it with all the crime, all the problems, and certainly the possibility, the increased potential for terror. I mean, if you look over at London, where their mayor is saying, just get used to it, this is the new normal. If you want to live in a nice town like London, you're just going to have to take the risk of getting blown up or stabbed. Now, do you remember a while back in Idaho, there was this horrible incident where 3 Muslim refugee boys raped a 5-year-old girl? And they were arrested. The media basically ignored the story because it makes the Muslim refugees look bad, and we can't do that. Or George Soros will put away his checkbook. And they went to trial, and they weren't convicted, and then they were sentenced. And here's where it gets weird. The judge put a gag order on the whole case. He sealed the case. The parents of the victim are literally blocked from commenting on the sentence that was handed to these 3 boys. Nobody knows how long they're going away for, or even that they're going away at all. The parents are allowed to say that they're very disappointed in the sentence, but that's it. If they go into any details, they can go to jail for contempt of court. And given that, in theory, the process of arresting, trying, convicting, and imprisoning an offender is to create a deterrent to others to commit that crime, how does this make sense? To just cover it all up and wall it away? And the answer is it doesn't. This is just more of that attempt to hide from you the terrible downside of that open borders policy, because George Soros wants a global government, and what George Soros wants, George Soros is going to get. There's never a large meteor when you really, really need it. Now, over at Judicial Watch, which is a tremendous organization, they have now filed a lawsuit against the University of California to end in-state tuition for illegal aliens. And because this is all being funded by the California taxpayer, and Judicial Watch is saying the Board of Regents of the university isn't the state legislature. they can't authorize illegal benefits like the tuition. More about this when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back to Judicial Watch and the University of California, we're getting this breaking story coming from Reuters. Iran's Revolutionary Guards are saying that the terror attacks that just took place in Iran were sponsored by Saudi Arabia. And apparently they've found evidence, or they've got individuals, and they're saying this is a deliberate provocation by Saudi Arabia along with going after Qatar. So yeah, it looks like Saudi Arabia is getting ready to make a grab for Qatar and Iran at the same time. Now, getting on back to this Judicial Watch lawsuit. The point they're making is that the Board of Regents of the University of California is not the legislature of California, and therefore they do not have the authority to allocate taxpayer money for anything to do with illegal immigrants. And they overstep their authority. More than that, it is, again, it's a Title VIII violation to aid and abet illegal immigrants. And I think what Donald Trump needs to do, when he gets a little more traction, when he gets past all of this endless Russia collusion nonsense, is he needs to tell the Attorney General, you start enforcing Title VIII on all these state governors, on all these city mayors, on all these university regents who are thumbing their nose at the United States of America and its citizens. Emphasis on citizens. Now, the other day we were talking about how modern education is all about indoctrination to get you to believe certain things like human-caused global warming, gender is fluid, and so forth and so on. And it turns out that there's a foundation for that analysis. Apparently, the Wall Street Journal was looking at a specific series of tests that are given to freshmen and seniors in colleges across the United States of America. And the test is designed to measure the improvement in their critical thinking skills. In other words, they measure how well incoming freshmen are able to analyze and deduce and think logically, and then they do the same test when they're a senior to see what improvement there has been. And they're finding all across the country there's virtually no improvement. That modern college education is about feeding your head full of things that you're going to believe in. They're not teaching people how to think. That's part of that dumbing down process. The government doesn't want you to think. They want you to believe. Believe we need to go to war. Believe in human-caused global warming. Believe that vaccines are safe for you. Don't look at the facts. Don't look at the raw data. Believe us when we tell you humans are warming the planet. Don't go out and look at the snow for yourself. What's wrong with you? It's not politically correct to look at snow. After all, snow is racist. And it really is getting out of control. Frankly, if I had been fortunate enough to be a parent, which evaded me, and if I had a child who was ready to go to college, I would seriously think about where I was going to send them, or even if. College education today is not the guaranteed path to a higher paying job. They're not out there. Look at all these college graduates who are just struggling under this immense load of student loan debt. And look at what is going on the college campuses. Apparently over at Evergreen State College, where they're out there screaming, you know, we need to have a white-free zone this, or a white-free day this, or all this other nonsense. Apparently the protesters are roaming the campus with baseball bats. They have been photographed on the campus carrying baseball bats. We are an empire in decline. The mob is taking over. Now, interestingly enough, more Americans died of drug overdoses in 2016 than there were casualties in the Vietnam or Korea wars. It is really out of control, and part of it, of course, is accidental overdose of prescription opiates, which are being put on out there as hard as they can. Get them all hooked, turn them into permanent customers. And there is, of course, the illegal heroin trade, which has exploded ever since the U.S. invaded Afghanistan. which is a tremendous source of high-quality opium. And we have run the article with the photos showing the coalition forces in Afghanistan guarding and protecting the opium poppies and handling the sacks of raw opium. We know that the elements of the U.S. government have been involved in the drug trade. I was rather pleased to see in the British press that they are talking about how Barry Seal was working for the CIA, running guns to Central America, funding it all with cocaine that was being brought back. We know that the CIA was bringing heroin into the United States from Vietnam, inside the body bags of all of our dead soldiers. The biggest drug smuggler in the country is the country. The war on drugs is just the war on the competition. These small little upstarts who are cutting in on the CIA's action. And a lot of people are dying, and not just here in the United States. A lot of that Afghan opium is being smuggled into Russia. And by the way, sending these drugs into other countries is a form of covert destabilization and attack. It was one of the reasons why Britain was selling opium to the Chinese was not just to make money off the Chinese people, but to bring China down as a competing world power. And ultimately it worked. The Chinese imperial government collapsed, and then there was a backflash where the communists took over. Oopsie. Didn't see that one coming, did you? Now, as you know, when I was working in Hollywood, I made my career primarily in the area of computer animation and visual effects. And it's been kind of fun to have watched it from the very, very early days of these vector graphic machines, the Earl and Sutherlands, PS2, and all the way up to the modern technology that we have today. What I have just sitting on this desktop is just amazing compared to what we worked with in the early days. But sometimes it gets put to purposes that are less than wonderful. We've seen that in the corporate media, which more and more is using visual effects and animation as a substitute for going on out and actually reporting what's going on in the world. But I think a new low has just been set by PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And they have produced a disturbing new video that supposedly shows a cat being abused at the hands of its owner. And apparently it's very graphic, it's very brutal, it's difficult to watch, and it is absolutely 100% fake. And now PETA is trying to get media organizations to publish the fake video to say, this is what's happening, this is what we're fighting here. Please send us money. And it's a fake, it's a hoax. And it's certainly not what we wanted to see computer animation used for. But again, technology is neither good nor bad. It is all the people who are using it. To what ends are they using it? Same thing applies to firearms. Firearms are neither good nor evil. The people holding them are using them for good purposes or evil. Virtually anything that exists in the world can be used for a good purpose or a bad purpose. It's the people. It's not the technology. It's like Theresa May was talking about censoring the internet because of the London bombing. What about all the people who do good work on computers, who share information on subjects like health, or just information on their hobbies, or do their business online? It isn't the computers that are the problem. It isn't the internet that's the problem. It's the people who decide to take a technology and put it to evil purposes. You should be going after the people, not the technology. And speaking of which, apparently there is a new malware out there, and it's been found lurking in PowerPoint files, the PPTs, the ones that will just play when you click on them. And it doesn't matter if you have macros disabled on your computer, because apparently somebody found a way to install what's called a PowerShell script into this PowerPoint file, which is executed inside the link. You don't even have to click it. It's that pernicious. Now, the good news is most Windows users are not using PowerShell. And if you don't even know what I'm talking about, there's the normal command shell that comes on up, which is very limited functionality. PowerShell is a lot more like the Windows shell you would get on a Linux machine. It's got a scripting language. It's far more powerful command line interpreter. But a lot of people don't use it. And if you're not using it, you probably ought to turn it off, because apparently it can be used as an attack vector on your machine. And you can go to a search engine and just search for disable PowerShell on whatever version of Windows you are using, because it's a different trick for different whatever. You may not even have it on your system. Apparently it's an optional download from Windows. But if you do have it and you're not using it, you might want to think about shutting it off. And if you don't know how to get into the internals of your Windows machine, have your local geeky friend do it for you. But again, it's not the PowerShell that's the problem. It is the human being who sat there and said, ooh, I can use this to harm other people. And there is no question that malware and cybercrime are completely out of control, causing billions of dollars in losses. NSA can't do a thing about it. In fact, NSA is a big part of the problem. So is the CIA. They developed all these tools that got leaked out and now are in the hands of the cyber criminals. You know how government works. If they can't actually fix anything, they're going to pretend it's not a problem. I mean, how much coverage of Fukushima are you seeing on the corporate media right now? None, because they can't do anything about it. They can't tax you for it. They can't win votes with it. It's just not important. Story coming out of Blacklisted News. Apparently, it's been discovered through various Freedom of Information requests. U.S. police forces are now more and more automatically extracting all the phone data from everybody who's being arrested. They do it without a warrant. The claim by the police is the arrestees are consenting to the download. I'm not sure how much coercion is being applied. But they're just siphoning off all that data. Now, anybody who's going to be a real criminal or a real terrorist, they're not going to be using the cell phones, tablets, whatever. They're going to have other systems out there. I mean, look at how tiny these Raspberry Pis are. You could build a computer that you have your nefarious activities on, like your bikini photo collection, and you could hide it someplace where they don't even know it's there. Now, getting on back to Theresa May and her desire to craft a completely new Internet that is subject to government control and regulation, because, by golly, I don't like it when people are out there telling the truth about it. More and more people are coming forward to say it's not really workable, and in any event, the real criminals and the real terrorists are going to have their own systems. And Jennifer Arcuri, co-founder of cybersecurity Hacker House, pointed out any government backdoor weakens the security of an encrypted comms channel. And if you allow a backdoor for a government, you have no idea who else is accessing or listening. And that, of course, has always been the argument. The biggest threat to your data is the government itself. And again, I refer back to this Asia-Pacific Economic Conference took place in Seattle back in the 90s. And it was a huge stink, because it came on out that U.S. government agencies, on the taxpayer dollar, were breaking into the computers of the conference attendees. Had nothing to do with crime, had nothing to do with terror. They were committing industrial espionage. They were stealing business secrets from the various attendees to the conference and passing them on to Bill Clinton's cronies to give them an advantage in making deals and negotiations. All of which is illegal, and certainly not the business of the U.S. government's intelligence agency. Now, the other day we were talking about Spectrum Internet, which, by the way, still cannot seem to get their act together in terms of communication with the mainland. It's a little better today. It was terrible yesterday. And Spectrum has come on out saying they are not throttling Internet access. They're actually being sued by the state of New York, or they were sued by the state of New York, for not delivering anywhere near the advertised speeds. And it is a problem. We pay for 300 megabits per second download, and as of this morning, we're getting maybe 40. So you can see it's an issue there. But Spectrum said they were not throttling the internet connections. Then somebody actually found a document at Spectrum's own website that acknowledges that while balancing network load, they may change speed parameters. So their thinking is, if we don't use the word throttle, then we can say we are not throttling the feed. Okay? Now, with that object lesson of corporate and government doublespeak there, Australia, in the next meeting with Five Eyes, the echelon people, is out there talking about a non-backdoor backdoor. And it really is, it is a backdoor implemented at the internet service provider level, but they're out there saying, well, no, it's not a backdoor. We're not calling it a backdoor. We're going to call it something else. We're going to call it from cooperation from the carriage services providers. And if we're not using the word backdoor, then it's not a backdoor. Now, to the cyber criminals and the hackers, they don't care what it's called. Once they find it, they will use it. And again, all of this spying is on law-abiding citizens who've done nothing wrong, because the real criminals and the real terrorists can come up with their own encryption. We proved that a few years ago with our NSA challenges. We wrote 6 separate codes and put them on out there. Not one of them was broken. And the NSA would have had a good motive to break the codes to discourage other people from writing their own encryption systems. And I'm not an encryption expert. And I'm only a moderately decent programmer. It's been a lot of years since I was a code slinger. I even had to go back and read the manual again to get the code to work. It was a little bit of a humiliating experience, but I did get it up and running, and it worked. And it's a very, very powerful code. And real criminals, terrorists, nation states, they're going to do this. So all of this spying, all about keeping watch on you to make sure you're not thinking those double plus ungood thoughts. Can you say dictatorship? I knew you could, children. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here and getting on with computers. Bit of an alarmist article that came out over at Government Slaves here, where apparently British experts are saying that hackers could actually access nuclear missile submarines. And obviously, when a nuclear missile submarine is at sea, it's effectively air-gapped. But they're talking about vulnerabilities when it is in port, being serviced, being repaired. Somebody could throw a flash drive in there and load some malware that activates when it's out at sea. And it's a long shot, but they're trying to make a big deal about it, that the British Navy's ballistic missile submarines are vulnerable. And how real that is, I don't know, but they keep pushing hacker, 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 hacker. And remember, one of the scenarios we have talked about as a false flag to scare us all into just going along with World War III is a virtual 9/11, where the entire internet is shut down, especially all those pesky truth websites like Republic Broadcasting, and blamed on whoever is to be invaded this next week. And every time they start cranking up hacker this, hacker that, it's just more of the booga booga, the fear-mongering that's going on. Now, here's an interesting story. It's from Natural News, and it's talking about the advent of drones and driverless tractors now being used for farming. And thinking about it, where you have farm fields that are laid out on a grid, it does look like a very reasonable application for robotics to be doing the plowing and the harvesting and so forth. But again, we need to be very cautious about this rush toward automation, because those robots that are working the farm will not be going to the grocery store to buy the food produced by the farm. And there is the issue. If you have an economy, manufacturing, agriculture, that's all being run by robots, and your human population is out of work, then how does the economy function? You've got producers unable to sell what they produce to consumers unable to buy. And I think there needs to be a serious long-term discussion about balancing automation against the necessity of keeping the vast majority of the nation employed. Of course, right now the vast majority of the nation is unemployed and on federal government handouts. And I'm a big fan of technology, but we have to factor in that human aspect. What does it do to the human society to be going in this direction? Now, there are things that robots are really good for, like going into ruined nuclear reactors, although they don't survive there very well. But I think we need to reserve certain areas of endeavor to the human race, simply to give them purpose, employment, a sense of pride. We're going to take a break for station identification. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And it looks like we're seeing a flip-flop coming from James Comey, because earlier in the day, the reports were coming on out that he was going to stop short of saying that President Trump obstructed justice, and that he was apparently going to spend most of his time arguing over Trump's claim that Comey said he wasn't under investigation, which is kind of a nitpick. Now, all of a sudden, we're seeing more and more reports. One came from Reason. I'm looking at one from Mike.com, where the Senate Intelligence Committee has released James Comey's pre-written intro to his testimony. And it's out there basically with a bunch of allegations, doesn't have any documentation, basically saying Trump's pressure on Comey was repeated and obvious, and that other senior administration officials let it happen. And then he goes on to say that he observed bizarre and troubling behavior by the president. So the media is already going to town that this is going to be devastating to Donald Trump. But there's a couple of points to make here. This pre-written testimony, it's just Comey's allegations. There's nothing to back it up at this point. And we know Comey has been caught lying before. We know Comey was protecting Hillary Clinton. And Comey has an axe to grind because Donald Trump did fire him. So we have to take what Comey is saying with a grain of salt. Now, the big question will be if he makes these same statements under oath before the Senate Intelligence Committee, because this document has not been sworn to. It's not under oath. Comey can say anything in there, and then when he gets under oath, he can say, well, it was just my opinion, and pull back. And meanwhile, the corporate media has got this pre-written intro to go to town with. And I think that might explain the disparity between the earlier reports that Comey was not going to say Trump obstructed justice while he was under oath, while at the same time putting out this intro to try and give the corporate media ammunition to pre-spin this whole thing. But this is a hatchet job, plain and simple. If Comey told me it was a sunny day outside, I would feel morally obligated to take an umbrella with me. Anybody who knows the real history of the FBI knows truth is a foreign concept to them. Go back and reread the history of COINTELPRO. Meanwhile, apparently Governor Jerry Brown, and I don't know, is there something in the water out there? Maybe it's all that fracking fluid that got into the drinking water, because they really are going crazy out there. Very alarming story, this one coming out of Red State. Apparently, Governor Jerry Brown is really sick and tired of the California taxpayers complaining about how the money is going to illegal immigrants and various other things that the people of California are not in favor of. And so Jerry Brown basically came out and said that the California taxpayers, meaning people who live in California, they have a job, they're paying their taxes, he's calling them freeloaders. They're freeloaders because they want to keep more of their money for themselves and they're not willing to give it to the illegal immigrants. I think the Californians need to take a real good look at the potential for election fraud going on in their state as well. Speaking of governors and states, this one is just a little bit out there. Our governor here in Hawaii has just signed a bill making Hawaii the first state in the nation to join the Paris Agreement, openly defying the Trump administration. There is just a little tiny problem. And it has to do with Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1 of the Constitution. No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque and reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, pass any bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts, or grant any title of nobility. That's in the Constitution. And that first part is right there. The governor of a state cannot enter into a treaty, agreement with a foreign nation, period, end of discussion. In addition, I think our governor just violated the Logan Act. Now, it may just be symbolic, and the governor is out there saying, well, we're just going to go along with the expectations and demands. But, you know, Hawaii is already hovering on the edge of bankruptcy. We've got this white elephant of the elevated rail system that has just turned into this horrible boondoggle. And all of this global warming nonsense, it's just another cash grab. Now, as you know, the oft-repeated claim by the carbon Nazis that the vast majority of climate scientists are wholly in agreement with this has been shown to be a fraud. A lot of the people whose names were on that list have demanded they be taken off. They've gone public saying they were never asked whether their name could go on the list. In some cases, they aren't even real scientists. They're just people who were around. They said, we're going to use your name. Build up the list. It was all a hoax. We're going to do a quick shout-out now to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining our network. Feel free to call into the show, 800-313-9443. The phones are actually working perfectly today. We're so glad. So, getting on back to human-caused global warming. Over at NoTrickZone.com, they have an article talking about how last year there were 60, actually more than 60, peer-reviewed papers published in scientific journals demonstrating that today's warming isn't global, unprecedented, or remarkable. And they had all these graphs, 80 of these graphs showing that, yes, there are some places on Earth that warm, some places are cooling, some places are showing no change at all. Now, remember, a week or so ago, NASA came on out admitting that the data from the satellite that they launched in 1979 to monitor the Arctic ice caps is not showing the ice caps are shrinking. In fact, for the last few years, they've been above the normal seasonal average. It just isn't there. Another article that came out, this is from What's Up With That, is another peer-reviewed paper talking about how as atmospheric carbon dioxide has increased, plant growth has accelerated. The Earth is greening, and that is a good thing. Now, the EPA has tried to sell the idea that carbon dioxide is a toxic pollutant. No, it is not. It is an essential component of the cycle of life here on Earth. If all the carbon dioxide magically went away, plants would die and animals would follow shortly thereafter. Now, as plants grow more, they will absorb more CO2 from the air. It's a naturally stable system. But you know, if there's a fast buck to be made off a natural process, well, then we'll make it artificial. And apparently, there's a company in Switzerland, Climeworks, that has developed a commercial plant that sucks carbon dioxide out of the air and then uses it to grow vegetables. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. Forgetting that if you plant the vegetables, they will suck carbon dioxide directly from the air all by themselves. And it does confirm carbon dioxide is plant food. The plants need it. The more CO2 there is, the more the plants will grow, and the more CO2 they will absorb, and the more oxygen they'll put out. And oxygen's a good thing. Another article, this is from paulstramer.net. Climate change. Climate change is code for excuse to tax. Any excuse will do when you're dealing with governments that are hopelessly in unpayable debt to those private central banks. And this article goes down with a lot of the comments I made on my ClimateGate page. Think about all the times you've told doom was coming. If you didn't do what the government told you, if you didn't buy this, if you didn't pay this tax, if you didn't fill out this piece of paperwork, horrible things were going to happen. Remember, back in the mid-1970s, the same people screaming global warming were talking about global cooling and the coming ice age. And that was as intellectually dishonest back then as they are now. Yes, climate changes. It always has. It always will. Call a press conference. Earth's climate changes. Remember all the things we've been told throughout the years? Y2K. Oh, it's going to be horrible. The killer bees. It's all about scaring you with some hobgoblin to trick you out of your money and your obedience. And they do it over and over and over and over again. And if you look back and you see this repeating pattern, you come to understand they're still doing the same thing. They're still doing the same thing. So let's talk about genetically modified crops. Because the U.S. is still trying to get other countries to sign treaties that will force them to buy genetically modified crops from the United States of America and abandon their own natural organic heritage crops. Interestingly enough, Melania has banned Monsanto from the White House diet. And she's not shy about explaining, well, as you know, their son Barron has got some health issues. And she's saying when they changed the diet to all natural organic, his health really began to improve. And we've seen that report from a lot of different people. The reason has to do with the way GMO works. Now, if you're cooking the food, obviously the altered DNA is destroyed. But it isn't the altered DNA that is the issue, at least in this case. There may be another one I'm going to get to in a minute. The issue is protein expression. Because if you change the DNA, you change the resulting proteins created by that DNA. Sometimes that is how they are putting in the chemicals like the pesticides. The problem is that DNA is intensely self-referential. You can't modify one part of the DNA to get your desired result and just expect that that's the only thing that will change. And we have seen some benign results of that. The Roundup Ready corn, the corn stalk, is much tougher than the natural variety. Farmers have to have Kevlar belted tires on their tractors. And that illustrates that when you alter the DNA of a life form, it may produce unpredictable results elsewhere in the organism that nobody is looking for. The results might not even surface for a very long time. So, Melania Trump has banned GMO from the White House diet. And apparently, GM foods are banned over at Westminster. Parliament doesn't want to have anything to do with them either. Now, as you know, down in Mexico, there was a lawsuit to ban Monsanto's GMO crops. The farmers wanted natural crops. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. And the last court decision basically ruled against Monsanto. And Mexico's Supreme Court has now refused to review. They're letting the lower ruling stand. Everybody is pushing back against this very dangerous, untested technology. And it is very, very dangerous. All the more so because the damage can occur over many years' time. It may not surface for a long while. It's not like when a reactor melts down and you get a big boom or something like that. The change is very subtle and pervasive all over the globe. Now, a few years ago, there was a problem where people were starting to come down with this condition called Morgellons disease. And, of course, the immediate response from the corporate media is, it's all in their heads. It's all in their heads. They're faking it. And people were really very, very concerned because these fibers were starting to grow out of people's skin. They were getting these itchy lesions. And somebody finally did an analysis of some of these fibers and found they contained plant DNA. And I think it would have been a legitimate question to ask if this Morgellons was the first GMO accident, and it was hushed up. But the reality is that if you have a nuclear reactor and it melts down, well, it's just there. 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima. You cover it all over and you keep everybody out for a while, and that's kind of the end of it. If you make a mistake with DNA and it breaks into the wild, as it inevitably seems to do in this day and age, then it gets everywhere and you could have a real problem. One area of concern that I have is the epicite gene. This was a gene developed in a GMO corn that would render anybody eating that corn unable to reproduce because it would trick the body into responding to human sperm as if it was an infection. You would generate antibodies that would attack the human sperm, would render you absolutely sterile. And this was developed under a USDA grant, and now it's owned by, in part, Monsanto. And if that gene got into the wild and wound up in all the world's corn, you're looking at a serious long-term population decline. This is the most dangerous technology man has ever played with. We're tinkering with the code of life itself. And if you look at how well companies like Microsoft write software, you realize there's a real risk going on there. All right, we're going to take a phone call. James in Ohio, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. As far as the GMO thing, there's a book which is an excellent starter book for anyone who's just become woke called You Are Being Lied To, edited by Russ Kick, who is the chief over at disinfo.com. And there's an article in there called You Are What You Eat, and it cites tests that show that rats that were fed different varieties of food, the DNA apparently made it through the intestinal wall and hybridized DNA from the food, hybridized with the living tissue inside the rats. So
wow.
That may be a concern, yeah.
Wow, that's
that's
very scary. Well, you know, you get into the area of what are called prions, you know, which can cause all kinds of very strange diseases because they're just tiny snippets of DNA that get broken off from either DNA or RNA, and they easily penetrate the cell walls, and they can just insert themselves. And potato blight is a prion-based disease, for example. But that's really scary. The idea that this modified DNA in the food, if it's not destroyed by cooking, can actually splice into the body of who's consuming it. That's really scary. I thought the primary danger was malformed protein.
Yeah. My ex was a surgeon's assistant, and she said when they opened somebody up for brain surgery and saw the spongiform, you know, the Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, that the stainless steel instruments that they used in the surgery, they didn't sterilize them, they incinerate them. They're so frightened of that. And by the way, there's a virologist, Colm Keller, has a book, I can't remember what it's called, but it's about Alzheimer's, and the idea is that a lot of the Alzheimer's cases, and especially early onset Alzheimer's, they're not Alzheimer's, they're mad cow disease, because nobody is checking the U.S. beef supply for bovine spongiform encephalopathy.
Boy, that is really very, very scary. I keep on going back to this idea that we're having all these new scourges, whether it's autism or eczema or other things, and how peanut anaphylaxis. And it all seems to track back to the abuses of the vaccines. And we do seem to have a lot of idiocy in terms of how our technology is being deployed, that it's simply rushed out there to marketplace to get the maximum profit. And these various government agencies, which we are told are supposed to be looking out for our well-being, they're looking the other way. And that really is scary. And we know that a lot of disease reports are being politicized, that a lot of things are being called flu that aren't really flu in order to push the flu vaccine sales. And it's really scary to live in a country where you literally cannot trust anything you're being told by the corporate media or the government. And you have to just go on out and try and find all that information for yourself. And maybe that's another reason why people are turning off their cable TV. They're getting on their computer to find out, am I being lied to about this or that medication? James, stay on the line. I want to come back to you after this commercial break.
All right.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with James in Ohio. And James, getting on back to this idea that fragments of DNA from GMO food have been discovered in lab rats to be penetrating the intestinal tract and actually merging into the cells of the rat itself. That is very alarming.
Oh.
Now, I understand at the microbial level, pathogen level, swapping of DNA happens a lot. That's how these new versions of flus come about, because they're so small and the genetic material is so exposed that it's easy for bits and pieces to clip on and off. But the idea of a multi-celled creature being affected in this way, that's very alarming.
Yeah, this was before GMOs were widespread. This was just food. I'm not sure. I can't remember what they fed them, but whatever the genes from meat or plant matter apparently pass through the intestine and hybridize. I had one other comment. You mentioned a vaccine against skepticism. I wasn't able to find the article on that. However, you also mentioned the previous story of a vaccine against religious fundamentalism. And in that case, they were talking about a vaccine that would inactivate a gene that produces a protein called VMAT2. And VMAT2 is supposed to be, they call it the God molecule. It's the molecule that makes you feel connected to something greater, spiritual feelings, romantic love, and everything. And they were going to develop a vaccine to knock that out in human beings. Now, the only problem with that is that they have mice and rats that they call knockouts, where they have genetically engineered them to not express a protein. And they've done that with VMAT2. The problem with that is they don't tend to live very long. So, if they do have this vaccine...
Nice to fool Mother Nature.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you for the information, and that does put a whole new dimension on it. And again, my primary area of concern for GMO food was malformed proteins, which your body attempts to take in, and they sort of look like the protein and try and fit into the receptor, but they don't quite. And inevitably, that's going to produce some side effects, which could be, cause illnesses, symptoms, other issues like that.
Our genome is like a Rubik's Cube with a million sides. They really don't know what they're doing when they go altering genes. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it's a disaster.
Well, I have enough problems with my 3x3 Rubik's Cube, so I'm not going to become a genetic engineer, even though I'm a big fan of designer genes.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks. We're going to let you go here. All right, now then, I just got an email. This is skipping on back to the economy and all the retail stores that are selling and everything like this. And I just got an email from a listener in Seattle, and they're saying that their Macy's store, and it's a big store. I've actually been there. Apparently, last year they sold the top 4 floors off to be redeveloped as office space, office rental space, and now they've just sold 2 more floors. So they're down to just 2 floors of what was once this huge 8-story tall Macy's. And again, people just don't have the money. It isn't the fault of online retail sales. People just don't have money. Prior to the 2008 mortgage security fraud meltdown, 60% of our economy was consumer spending. You can't yank that out without devastating consequences, and we're starting to see that. All right, we're going to start a phone call with Jerry in Chicago, and Jerry, in about 30 seconds, I'm going to have to put you on hold through the commercial break, but go ahead and start what you want to say.
Okay, well, first of all, what I wanted to say is I called in 2 days ago, and I told you I bought 5 10-ounce silver bars, but the problem is the real question I wanted to ask you was, let's say the currency in this country, the petrodollar collapses and things are measured in dollar. What would that silver be worth?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to put you on hold, and we're going to do 4 minutes of commercials, and then I'll come on back and I'll answer your question.
Thank you.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with James. I'm sorry. We're talking with Jerry in Chicago. And first of all, I wouldn't use the term petrodollar because that actually applies to a narrow range of U.S. economic activity in terms of having the resource-rich areas of Earth sell those resources only for the dollar. So that's what the petrodollar is. Now, when you're talking about the dollar or any monetary unit, the way it worked throughout history was there was an agreed-upon commodity of recognized value that was established as the standard, the benchmark. And all other items of value were declared to be proportional to it. And that was certainly the way the country started, where the silver and the gold in the coinage was the money. And it was a recognized unit of value, and everything else was always equated to that silver and that gold value. Now, following the creation of the Federal Reserve and the delinking of metals from the paper currency, they're all flying around wildly. And when you start talking about what your silver is going to be worth during the crash of the dollar, well, the silver is worth what it is right now in your hand. The question is, how little will the dollar be worth relative to it? That's probably going to be set by your classic market forces of supply and demand.
Okay, but again, I'm looking for a measurement. I mean, right now silver is trading around $18 an ounce. But if you were to measure it, say, after the crash, and it's $150 an ounce, the thing is that $150 is still worthless. It's like the Weimar Republic.
Yeah, absolutely, or the Zimbabwe banknotes. And at that point, there's going to have to be a new stable monetary system imposed. One of the things that a lot of preppers are doing is they're going out to websites like eBay and they're getting what is called junk silver, which are the pre-1964 U.S. coins that actually had metal in them. The dimes and quarters had silver, the nickels had nickel, the pennies actually had a penny's worth of copper. These are recognized units of value that will be certainly usable as a currency, monetary unit, rather, following the collapse of the paper dollar.
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, I still pull out my 1982 or pre-pennies because I believe they're worth 2.3 cents in copper value as of today.
Yes, they keep talking about getting rid of the penny because it's actually costing them more than a penny to make them.
Yes. Okay, and now here's one other question, and this regards your last caller talking about DNA. I heard Dr. Deagle last week talking about back in 1976, DARPA was working on something where they had trained mice to be attracted to the scent and the dander and the cat fur, and they would literally walk into their, commit suicide by walking right up to the cat.
I think that actually came out from a parasite that was infecting mice and altering their brains because the parasite needed to go through the cat to reproduce, and I forget the exact details, but that's where that all came from. Yeah, it is possible for outside chemicals to alter behavior. I mean, certainly anybody who's into recreational drugs understands that. I remember when I was living in Los Angeles, there was this really nasty stuff going on. It was called angel dust. I don't even remember what was in it. But it was causing people to just do incredibly insane, bizarre things. So, yeah, your body is very, very porous, and you do have to be careful what you're putting in there. Because, again, it doesn't stay in the gut. It doesn't stay in the stomach. One of the things that I find very alarming about our current situation is that cosmetic companies are exempt from much product testing on the excuse that their products are applied externally only. And we know that's not true. Chemicals can penetrate your skin. Anything with DMSO is going to go right through the skin. If you ever take a physiology course, one of the experiments they'll do in the classroom is rub garlic on the soles of your feet and then time how long it is before you taste it in your mouth. The body is actually quite porous to certain classes of chemicals.
I think the human body is a very unique thing, and I you know what? The more you learn, the more you protect it, the more you build your immune system, which is, I believe, your body armor against all of the crap that the FDA and the USDA and the petrochemical pharmaceutical corporations are pumping into us. And you know what? Thanks for bringing that up, and I'll let you go. Thank you very much for taking my call.
All right, well, thank you very much for the phone call here. You know, one of the really bizarre things in our culture is how there's so much cosmetics and soap and brushes where they want you to scrub the dead skin cells off of your skin. But those dead skin cells, the epithelial layer, is one of the first lines of defense against infection. And the more you exfoliate, the more you're actually exposing the lower levels of your skin to potentially infectious organisms, including those that may lead to various and sundry skin cancers. But it is a rather amazing aspect of the human race that our desire to appear to be whatever the current definition of beautiful is will often lead us to engage in very toxic behaviors destructive of our health. A really good example, of course, would be during Elizabethan England. Remember when everybody had those big, tall collars that completely hid the neck? Well, the reason for that was that following Queen Elizabeth and that very white paint that they were all putting on their face, that was actually based on lead oxide. And they were getting lead poisoning, and it was resulting in these horrible lesions on the neck. And rather than stop using the lead paint on the face, because it was the fashion, the Queen was doing it after all, everybody started wearing those gigantic collars. It is interesting. Now, I want to step back here to that story I did about the farm tractors and everything, because I got a very hostile email from somebody who's obviously a fan of technology, accusing me of being a Luddite and all the rest of it. And I'm not a Luddite, okay, because I've spent my life involved in technology, whether it was back with NASA, computer animation, what I'm doing with all of this equipment here right now. I just feel that there has to be a balanced approach. I think technology is perfectly valid to build to do those things humans cannot. My concern is when we start substituting technology for things humans can do, there's going to be an economic displacement, and that needs to be taken into the calculations for policy. And we're hearing about more and more stores that are going to automated food preparation, robotic food preparation, and that's all well and good. But what about the people who are being displaced and they no longer have their jobs? Something has to be done about that. And I think it's time for a national discussion on that. And no, I'm not a Luddite. I'm just saying we are creating a problem. We're leading to a society, and this is a little reducto ad absurdum logic, where we're going to have factories full of robots and stores full of robots standing around doing nothing because there are no more customers able to come on in and buy what the factories are making and the stores are selling. Obviously, that's not a working economy. A working economy is where people work. They're able to earn money. They're able to trade their labor for wages and salaries to pump that money back into the system. And the more people you put out of work with the robots, the less commerce is going to be taking place. Those robots aren't going to the store to buy things. Anyway. Over at the Dakota Access Pipeline, a lot of people are wagging fingers and saying, I told you so, I told you so, because the pipeline is not even running at full capacity and it's already developing multiple leaks. And so those protesters, they had a legitimate point. The land is being exposed to these toxic petrochemicals. The water supply to the reservation and downstream is at risk. But unfortunately, we're living in a country where corporate profits are considered important and people are not. We're just here to make them rich or fight their wars. And that's it. Now, a little bit of my love for technology here. Virgin Galactic has conducted the 5th glide flight test with the VSS Unity. This is their first space tourism craft. and they have had 5 successful drop glide tests, and now they're getting ready to move on to the next phase, where they're actually going to add weight to the spacecraft, test its maneuverability, and get ready for an actual rocket-powered flight. So they're moving ahead with that, and boy, that would be a treat. I mean, I'm never going to have the money to be able to do that. Just to get into space just once here. Now, Paul Allen, we tease him a lot because of his penchant for buying lots and lots of yachts. Whereas, let's be realistic, he can only be on one of them at a time. But he is doing some really cool things here. And apparently, he has decided that he wants his own space launch capability. And he founded a company called Stratolaunch Systems. And their approach to space launch is to have a large airplane that carries small rockets up to the top of the atmosphere. They drop, fire, go into orbit. And to do this, he has built what is now the world's largest airplane. And they just debuted it. They rolled it out of its hangar in the Mojave. It looks to me like a Rutan design, classic Rutan design, and it is huge. It's something like a 500-foot wingspan. And that will be amazing to see. Get on up there. Yeah, now's the time to commercialize space. Let's make it profitable, whether it's space tourism or space-based manufacturing. That was a big part of the justification for the space station, which is, what, now in its 17th year? Amazing. I look up and I see that thing flying overhead, and I remember that when I was a little kid, there were no satellites. I was born before Sputnik. Now there's all kinds of things up there, and I got to work on Viking and Voyager and all this other stuff. And so, yeah, I think we're coming up on that time to renew our commitment to space travel. And I'm fully on board with Donald Trump's plan to change NASA away from simply rubber stamping human-caused global warming and getting back to the business of space exploration. Not because I'm out there saying that I want to see the American flag on these other planets. And only partly because I'm curious about what's going on those other planets. I'd like to see a confirmation that we did find life on Mars in Viking. I'd like to see if there's something swimming around in those methane pools on Titan. I'm kind of curious about those things. But the most important reason to support a renewed civilian space program is it is a technology incubator, and that is something that is really missing from this country. We have military technology incubators. They're getting a lot of money to make things that kill people. But the military likes to keep things secret. And usually by the time the military will actually release a technology that they have developed, it'll be 10, 15 years down the road when the potential for commercial application is virtually nil. And those of you who are on my age are going to remember that that tech boom of the 70s, 80s, and 90s all came out of solving the problems of going to the moon with the Apollo Moon program. Whether it's these computers we're looking at, the microchips, this amazing Raspberry Pi, my little geek watch I have here. We need that again. Our government foolishly allowed the manufacturing, based on the technology from Apollo, to be let go to other countries. We had a corporate culture that didn't want to dirty its hands on the actual making of products, so they just licensed the technology somewhere else along with the jobs that go with it. And those other countries that have acquired the rights to manufacture those products, they're not going to let it come back. They're not going to be that foolish. They're going to hang on to it. If we're going to make America great again, economically, we have to leapfrog ahead into the next technology. Whether it's photonics, new materials, finding something you can actually do with aerogels, it's out there. Solving problems of going out into space are going to help spawn these new industries, new products, new technology. So I'm fully on board with that. I'm looking forward to them launching the James Webb Space Telescope. That is going to be an amazing, amazing craft. I've been looking at the engineering simulations of it. A lot of things could go wrong, and unfortunately it's going to be so far away from Earth that it's not going to be reachable by any repair crew. So I hope they're a little more careful with this one than they were with the original Hubble telescope, because that was a huge embarrassment back then. Now then, apparently there's been a big stink where apparently United Airlines flew a passenger jet that was not declared airworthy 23 times. And apparently the airline replaced a fuel pump pressure switch in response to a problem a flight crew had documented, but instead of performing the required inspection, the FAA said United simply put the plane back into service. That's against the rules. You're not supposed to do that. When you replace a component on a passenger jet, you have to inspect it and test it and make sure it's really working. Now, getting on back to space again. If you're an astronomer, and especially if you're a radio astronomer, and most especially if you're involved in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, you'll probably remember an incident that happened back in 1977 called the WOW signal. And this radio astronomer had an antenna pointed up in the sky above Ohio, and there was this huge surge in the radio signal. And it was so impressive, he actually wrote WOW on the paper readout next to the data. And this was Dr. Jerry Ehlman, and it came from Sagittarius, but it matched no known celestial object. It lasted for 72 seconds, and UFO, space alien, SETI people have been saying it had to be a message from intelligent extraterrestrials, even though the signal sounded a lot like noise. Well, finally a researcher figured out what was going on. They went back and looked at where the comets were in 1977 and discovered there were two comets that went through where the antenna was looking. And the radio signals created by the comet's gas interaction is what caused the signal. And you do have to be careful about that. Now, that being said, I'm absolutely convinced the universe is full of life and full of intelligent life. I just can't think of a reason why they would waste their time with us. But again, I keep seeing all of this stuff from Curiosity where they're finding all this stuff and they keep saying, could have been life, may have been life, looking awfully. I wish somebody at NASA would grow spine and say, yeah, there was life on Mars, or more to the point, there still is. We're going to take a break for commercials, back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the program. Don't bother calling. We're not going to take any more calls because we're wrapping up the show here a little bit. Getting on back to human-caused global warming and Al Gore, and we all love to make fun of him for some of the amazing things he's said and done over the years. When he was out there running for president, he went up to New Hampshire and he wanted to impress everybody that he was this outdoorsman, and he wanted a picture of himself paddling a canoe, and they went out to a lake, and the lake was very, very low, and they actually literally could not get the canoe to float. So Al Gore literally called up the New Hampshire state authorities to open a floodgate on a dam so the water would come on down and the pond would rise and he could get his picture paddling the canoe. New Hampshire was in the middle of a drought at the time. And more recently, when he was starting to push this whole human-caused global warming thing, he was actually interviewed on TV saying that the temperature of Earth's core is millions of degrees, which is absolutely wrong. Al Gore doesn't really have an educational background to be involved in climate. He's a politician. That's what he's always done. And as a matter of fact, his science grades in college were mediocre at best. But the latest one has to just be the topper. This is over at Natural News, and Al Gore is out there doing interviews. He's pushing global warming. I think he's trying to basically get everybody ready to see his new movie, The Inconvenient Sequel, which is probably going to be about as ludicrous as his first mockumentary, The Inconvenient Truth. And he made this bizarre comment in an interview on Fox News where high tides are proof that global warming is rising, is increasing sea levels. See, you're seeing the water come up, just a few feet an hour, and that's proof that the world's oceans are rising. No, it's proof that there are tides. There's that big rock out there called the moon, and that even bigger ball of hydrogen gas called the sun. They tug at the water, and you get high tides and low tides. And when you have a new moon or a full moon, you get the strongest tides. And that is absolutely nothing to do with the level of the oceans rising overall. It is simply where the water is piled up due to that gravitational tug. And it is just amazing how dumb this guy really is about this subject that he is purporting to be such an expert on. So, and again, this is how politicians work. Take something that's happening naturally, declare it a crisis, and offer to sell you a solution. Or even if there isn't something, make it up. Killer bees, Y2K. The end of the world is coming if you don't give me money and obedience. And as I keep saying over and over again, how many times do you have to be lied to before you're ready to stand up and say, you guys are full of it and I am just not listening to you anymore? Because that's the best and most appropriate response. Just stop listening. I get emails from this one person who's always watching The View and just going on about the crazy, insane things they're saying, and I keep writing back saying, why are you watching? Why are you subjecting yourself to this? Turn it off. That's what the power switch is for. That's what the channel selector is for. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. And until then, again, take what you learn here, take what you learn from the website, share it with everyone that you know. We're in a war to try and get the truth out there against a coordinated lie storm from the corporate media and the government. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.